Hello everyone, welcome to the first edition of the Eastern Writing and Research Fall Workshop Series. This is the very first one that we'll be doing. My name is Chelsea Post, I'll be your presenter today. And what we're going to talk about is how to quote, paraphrase, and summarize material from scholarly articles that you then can use in your research. And the first thing that we want to talk about is what that actually is. So, basic definitions. Quoting means that you're going to use the writer's exact wording in your paper. You're going to basically copy and paste whatever they said in their article, in their book, what have you, and put it directly into your paper without changing a thing. Paraphrasing, on the other hand, puts the writer's words into your own. So that means that you're taking whatever they said and rephrasing it in a way that is in your voice. That's why it's called paraphrasing. You're rephrasing what they are originally writing. Summarizing also puts the writer's words into your own, but it condenses it. So that means it's not going to be as many words. You're going to be stating something in a sentence rather than a paragraph. So why do we do these things? Why do we quote? Why do we paraphrase? Why do we summarize? Well, there are a number of reasons. First and foremost, it helps provide support for the claims that you make in your own assignment. It actually gives some feedback. You don't want to just say something in your paper and expect your reader to believe it. You want to provide evidence and support for whatever it is that you're talking about. Along with that is adding credibility to your writing. So again, having these other sources that you're pulling upon adds credibility to your own writing and what you're saying. You're not just pulling this information out of thin air. It can also be used to call attention to a position that you want to agree or disagree with in the paper. A classic example of this would be to cite an author in your paper, but then refute what that author has to say afterwards. Something along the lines of, according to Jones, the sky is purple, however, I know that the sky is blue, and here's why. Something like that. Additionally, it can help expand the breadth or depth of your writing. So again, this comes down to adding the ability to make it so that your writing is a lot more efficient, a lot more academically sound, more professional looking, really. And last but not least, quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing will help you avoid plagiarism. And a big note with this is that you always have to cite the source of every quotation, paraphrase, and summary that you do. And if you fail to do this, even by accident, you open yourself up to a charge of plagiarism. This is a very serious thing that you want to avoid at all costs. So making sure that you are citing the sources correctly is very important. We'll be talking more about citation styles in a later video, but I just wanted to draw this to your attention. And additionally, this is a very easy chart with which you can follow just to answer the question of whether you should cite something or not. You start in the top left corner there, and the first question you ask yourself is the information your idea? Is what you have written yours or not? And if it is, then all you really have to ask yourself is if you've published the information before. And if you haven't, you don't need to cite it because it is your words, it's your ideas that you don't have to cite as yourself. However, if the information's not your idea, or if you've published the information before, then the next question you want to ask yourself is it common knowledge, such as the sky is blue, right? If it is common knowledge, you don't need to cite it. That's a fact that people know, and that you don't have to give much evidence for that. However, if it's not common knowledge, then you just ask yourself if you're copying the source exactly, if you're putting it in your own words, or summarizing it, right? If you're saying you're using your own words, but you're condensing it down to one sentence. Copying exactly, it's a quotation. If it's your own words, it's a paraphrase. If it's your own words but in a single sentence, it's a summary. And really, as long as you follow these guidelines every time, you'll have no problem figuring out how to avoid plagiarism and how to actually cite something. So the next question you might ask yourself is, which one do you do? When is it appropriate to quote? When is it appropriate to paraphrase? And there's really a couple of common tips that you can think of when you're doing this. So the first thing to know is if it's long, you're going to want to summarize. So if you're looking at an article and you have more than 2 paragraphs that you want to include in your paper, you don't want to quote them. That's too big of a block quote. It's going to break up your paper too much and it won't look good. And so what you'll want to do is take those 2 paragraphs and summarize it down. Bring it down to maybe a couple sentences. That would be a summary, and that would be perfectly fine to do. And in general, you don't want to actually quote too much. If you end up using too many quotations, your readers are actually going to wonder whether any of your own ideas are in the paper at all, in which case they might just go back to that original paper that you're citing and leave yours alone. And you don't want to do that. So you don't want to quote too much. You want to quote just enough to kind of leave an impact. And also, it comes down to what type of assignment it is that you're actually doing. This is not a hard and fast rule, but generally, if you're doing a sciences paper, so paper for biology, paper for mathematics, something like that, you're more often going to paraphrase and summarize. And that's mainly because that in these fields, it's the results and the data that matter, not necessarily the words used to report those. So quoting a scientific paper is not really going to be that exciting. It's not as important to use the exact wording that they do. However, for the humanities, you're more often than not going to use quotation marks, and that's really only when the exact words matter, right? So think of if you're quoting from an author, right? And you want to have the exact wording that they may have used in a novel that they wrote. And that passage is really important to what you're talking about, then you are going to want to quote it. Or if it's a really long quote, you're going to quote parts of it, not the entire thing. And also, going along with that, if you have the exact words of a secondary source, someone who is reviewing the author that you're talking about, then you would quote them. So that's a general rule. It's going to be different depending on what you're doing, and more often than not, you will be paraphrasing and quoting most often. Summarizing is very similar to paraphrasing and is really only used for very long passages that you want to paraphrase. But these are rules that you want to keep in mind whenever you're doing these things. So going a little bit more in depth with quoting and how you might want to quote. These are, again, some tips that you want to keep in the back of your mind. The first and probably most important tip that I can give you is you want to provide context for the quotes that you're using. You don't want to just drop a quote in the middle of your paper and walk off. It's not a mic drop. You want to make sure that you're providing some sort of cushion around it so it's not as jarring to the reader. Something as simple as according to so-and-so or so-and-so says, something like that. And you want to keep your quotes for significant phrases, right? So things that you would not be able to restate yourself without losing the meaning. Those are the kinds of passages that you want to use as quotes. Things that you look at and you read and it makes an impact for you. That's what you want to quote. Those are the ones that you want to completely and utterly not change anything about it. You just put it right into your paper and you quote it exactly. Right? And along with this is using signal words, right? So these are in red, there are some examples for some signal verbs that you might want to use to provide that context for your paper. According to, acknowledges, declares, remarks, states, the list goes on, but any of those words are going to help provide context for what you're quoting, right? And it won't look quite so jarring. So, paraphrasing, right? So these are, again, some tips for how you might go about paraphrasing. And a lot of these may seem common sense, but still, it's important to keep these in mind. So first things first, try your paraphrasing without actually looking at the source, right? So when you've found a place that you still want to include it as a source, right? But maybe it's not quite appropriate enough for an exact quotation mark, but you still want to include it in some way, and you want to paraphrase it. Think of that passage in your mind, put the source away, the article away, the book away, and then try restating it in your own words. And in the end, whatever sticks out to you and what you remember is what's most important. And that's what's going to end up in your paraphrase. So that helps you not accidentally plagiarize it as well. Again, you want to use this for factual data, so there's no need to quote statistics verbatim. You don't need to quote 50% of people have friends, something like that. You don't have to quote that verbatim. That you would use as a paraphrase. You could also use paraphrasing to eliminate wordiness in the original source. So while the author's ideas might actually be important, maybe they stated in a way that was too verbose, that had too many words in it, and you want to paraphrase it in order to condense it to make it fit better in your paper. And that's perfectly fine. And again, just to reiterate, citing this information is still necessary because it's not your ideas. So this is something that you want to always remember, that if it's not your idea, more often than not, you're going to end up citing it in some way, shape, or form. So you want to make sure that you're doing that as you're paraphrasing. And last but not least, summarizing. Again, summarizing is very similar to paraphrasing, so the same tips that apply to paraphrasing also apply to summarizing. But in general, you want to summarize in order to avoid unnecessary details, show comprehension for the source that you're using, and to give your audience an introduction to the source. So more often than not, you'll find that summarizing tends to happen in your introduction paragraph or in an introductory body paragraph. So that's more often than not where summarizing actually occurs when you're looking at a source that's actually written. And last but not least, I'll give you some best practices for reading and note-taking while you have these sources with you. So you've found the sources, you've used the databases to locate them, and what do you do with them? So first things first, take notes as you read. Whether that means you're taking notes in a Google Doc or in a notebook at your side, however is most important to you, you want to take notes as you're actually reading. At the same time, you're going to draw links to other resources that you've found. So let's say you have your textbook near you and you have your secondary source that you're reading right away. Something might pop up in the secondary source that you're reading that reminds you of something that you found in your textbook. Make sure you write that down, draw that link, make sure that you have those connections. Because when you find those connections in the source themselves, it makes it a lot easier to then insert those same links in your paper as you're writing it. You want to locate keywords that you can use for additional searches as well. Usually you can actually find these at the beginning of articles that you're finding. Usually underneath the abstract, you'll find a list of keywords that are associated with that particular article. So you'll want to find those keywords, write them down as well, and then make sure that you do additional searches later using those keywords. You'll end up finding different sources that way. Going along with this is finding subject headings for the articles as well. Usually these are in bold or hyperlinked as well in the database itself. This will allow you to then click on them and do a separate search just for that. A subject heading, to give you a little bit of library information, is an authoritative category that's actually been assigned to that article itself. Essentially, when that article is added to the database, it is then assigned either 1 or 2 or even more than that, could be upwards to 10 different subjects that it's actually associated with. And it becomes a much more efficient way of actually finding these articles. Because when you filter down to a subject heading as opposed to a keyword search, what you're getting is all these articles that have already been assigned to that subject heading. And so you know that it's an authoritative version of what you're actually looking at. And last but not least, we recommend that you might want to use a citation manager, something like RefWorks, which is the program that we at Eastern actually use. And this will allow you to organize your sources much more clearly. Certainly, there's nothing wrong with putting a bunch of PDFs in a folder on your desktop. That's certainly a tried and true method for organizing your research, but something like a citation manager like RefWorks actually has built-in tools within it that allows you to automatically alphabetize your sources, create bibliographies, and it also ensures that you don't actually mess up that citation, because it is very important that you get that citation formatting and that styling correct. Like I said, we'll be talking a little more about citation in a later video, but I just wanted to bring this to your attention and let you know that this exists. So now we're going to go ahead and try a search. I'm going to find an article for you, point out where these keywords and subject headings exist, and we'll do some searching that way. So right now I'm in one of our databases right now. Technically, I am in a database called Academic Search Complete. It's a very general database owned by EBSCO, which is one of our vendors here at the college. And I'm just going to do a very basic search for something. I'm going to search for therapy dogs, right? So you'll see that the database actually does fill in some terms for me, gives me some ideas of what I might want to use. I can ignore them though and go with my own search. And when I get this search, I have a series of academic journals here that I can look at as well. This database also includes some videos that I may want to look at. It also has more than just academic journals. It also includes magazines and newspapers as well. But I'm going to stick with just the academic journals to give you an idea of how this works. So let's say I want to use this article, or at least take a closer look at it in my research. When I click on the title, it's going to open up the article right here. So I've got the title. This is actually the beginning of the article itself, and then I could click on the PDF full text in order to take a closer look at it as well and start reading it right away. So in this particular article, and I will say that the articles themselves, the keywords and the abstracts are going to look different depending on the publication. So in this case, the abstract is right here on the front, and we've got the introduction right here. They've got the citation over here, some copyright information, all of that. And so what I could do is I could read the abstract here and get an idea of some of the other keywords that I may want to use for this particular article. If I go back to the detailed record, I can also see all the subject terms that are listed here. So we've got urban hospitals, therapy dogs, pet therapy is another subject term that appears. That might be another search that I'd want to do because that is a different terminology than what I'm used to seeing. So I may want to use that for what I'm actually looking for. Also on this database, we do have the ability to export it to that RefWorks Citation Manager tool that I mentioned. Over here on the right, I can click on Export, and it gives me some options for where I want to export it to. It's automatically set to export to RefWorks, but in case I had a different tool, such as EasyBib or EndNote or Noodle tools, I could actually change this and have it go to whatever citation form, a citation manager that I want it to go to. So you don't have to use RefWorks. It's just the one that we as an institution have aligned ourselves with. So it's the one that we recommend the most. And that is all I really had to show you today. Thank you so much for attending today's session. We will have some more sessions in the near future. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions.